Good morning, everybody. It is good to see you out this morning. It is good to be with you and to worship God together with you. You know, it's kind of funny to be talking about having a packed house in this auditorium with maybe 170 people, but that's about where we are this morning. And I am thankful that despite all of the troubles around us, we are still allowed to gather here. It probably won't come as a surprise to most of you that by nature I am a worrier. Now, I come by that very honestly. My father before me was a famous worrier. He'd chew his fingernails about just about anything. And like him, I too like to fret about stuff that I can't control. You know, I worry about the future of my family, I worry about the future of the country, I worry about the future of the church, and so on and so on and so on. And I'm fully aware that that's not exactly the best thing from a spiritual perspective, but that's one of my struggles. And so it was with interest a few days ago that I saw one of my friends on Facebook post something about the book of Habakkuk. Now, to most people, the connection between Habakkuk on the one hand and worry on the other wouldn't necessarily be obvious. I suspect that most people would probably struggle even to find Habakkuk in their Bibles. But here's the deal. Like me, Habakkuk was clearly somebody who worried. He fretted about all the stuff that was going on around him in the 7th century BC, about the wicked people and what God was going to do about it all. But unlike us, Habakkuk gets to do something about it. He gets to have a conversation with God about his worries. And so by the end of the book, which is essentially a recounting of that conversation, Habakkuk is able to move from a place of worry to a place of faith. And in a time like ours, where I think many of us can find so much to worry about, what I'd like to do this morning is just to read through the book of Habakkuk and look what it has to say to us about faith. In Habakkuk, there are 4 main lessons that I want to identify. You might as well turn there, even if you have to use your table of contents to do it. We'll be there the whole time. But in Habakkuk, there are 4 thoughts that I want us to focus on, 4 ideas that are based around the 4 main sections of the book. And the first of these is that God can use even the wicked to judge the wicked. Let's pick up with this in Habakkuk chapter 1. We'll go through about the first chapter or so. See, I turned right past it myself. Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk is how it goes. The pronouncement that the prophet Habakkuk saw. How long, Lord, must I call for help and you do not listen, or cry out to you about violence and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. And this is God's reply, starting in verse 5. Look at the nations and observe. Be utterly astounded. For I am doing something in your days that you will not believe when you hear about it. Look, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter, impetuous nation that marches across the earth's open spaces to seize territories not its own. They are fierce and terrifying. Their views of justice and sovereignty stem from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than wolves of the night. Their horsemen charge ahead. Their horsemen come from distant lands. They fly like eagles, stooping to devour. All of them come to do violence. Their faces are set in determination. They gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings, and rulers are a joke to them. They laugh at every fortress and build siege ramps to capture it. Then they sweep by like the wind and pass through. They are guilty. Their strength is their God. And then starting in verse 12, this is Habakkuk talking again.
Are you not from eternity, Lord my God? My Holy One, you will not die. Lord, you appointed them to execute judgment. My rock, you destined them to punish us. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? Why are you silent while one who is wicked swallows up one who is more righteous than himself? You have made mankind like the fish of the sea, like marine creatures that have no ruler. The Chaldeans pull them all up with a hook, catch them in their dragnet, and gather them in their fishing net. That is why they are glad and rejoice. That is why they sacrifice to their dragnet and burn incense to their fishing net. For by these things their portion is rich and their food plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continually slaughter nations without mercy? I will stand at my guard post and station myself on the lookout tower. I will watch to see what he will say to me and what I should reply about my complaint. To summarize, what we see going on in this chapter plus is basically three exchanges between Habakkuk and God. It starts off with Habakkuk complaining about all the wicked people around him, all those who are working injustice, all those who are hurting their neighbors. And God says, don't worry, I've got this. I am sending the nation of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, to punish the nation of Judah for their sin. Habakkuk, though, doesn't find this reassuring. Instead, he asks, but God, the Chaldeans, they're even worse than the people of Judah. How come you're using them to punish people who are not quite as bad as they are? And so at this point of the book, we still see Habakkuk being confused. Here, though, 2,700 years later approximately, I think we see a valuable lesson about how it is that God works in our world. It might be that, like Habakkuk, we look around, we see evil on the rise, we see things going in the wrong direction. And so we start asking, well, where's God in this? And from Habakkuk 1, I think the question is maybe that is where God is. It is unquestionable that at this point in the history of the nation of Judah, God's people were wicked. They needed to be humbled. They needed to be purified. And God, in his wisdom, chose to send the Chaldeans to do exactly that. And if indeed things seem to be going unfavorably for God's people today, it may well be that we also need to be humbled. We also need to be purified. We also need to be made to confront our sins. And if that's what happens, that does not mean that God is absent. That means that God is working. The second main idea, though, that we see in Habakkuk is that only faithfulness can protect us from wrath. Beginning with verse 2 of chapter 2. The Lord answered me, write down this vision, clearly inscribe it on tablets so one may easily read it. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It testifies about the end and will not lie. Though it delays, wait for it, since it will certainly come and not be late. Look, his ego is inflated. He is without integrity. But the righteous one will live by his faith. Moreover, wine betrays. An arrogant man is never at rest. He enlarges his appetite like Sheol, and like death he is never satisfied. He gathers all the nations to himself. He collects all the peoples for himself. Won't all of these take up a taunt against him, with riddles and mockery about him? They will say, woe to him who amasses what is not his, how much longer, and loads himself with goods taken in pledge. Won't your creditors suddenly arise, and those who disturb you wake up? Then you will become spoil for them. Since you have plundered many nations, all the peoples who remain will plunder you. because of human bloodshed and violence against lands, cities, and all who live in them. Woe to him who dishonestly makes wealth for his house, to place his net on high, to escape the grasp of disaster. You have planned shame for your house by wiping out many peoples and sinning against your own self. For the stones will cry out from the wall, and the rafters will answer them from the woodwork. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and founds a town with injustice. Is it not from the Lord of armies that the peoples labor only to fuel the fire, and countries exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord's glory, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives his neighbors drink, pouring out your wrath, and even making them drunk in order to look at their nakedness. You will be filled with disgrace instead of glory. You also drink and expose your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you. In utter disgrace will cover your glory. For your violence against Lebanon will overwhelm you. The destruction of animals will terrify you because of your human bloodshed and violence against lands, cities, and all who live in them. In this section, we see God addressing Habakkuk's concern. What is going to happen to the Chaldeans? What is going to happen to this instrument of divine vengeance that seems to be profiting by doing evil? And God's answer simply is that their time is coming too. God is well aware of the evil that they are doing. And by no means is God going to allow the Chaldeans to go unpunished either. In fact, in this section in which we see God pronouncing a curse against the wicked, there's only one ray of hope. It's, in fact, I believe the only verse in Habakkuk that is quoted in the New Testament, but it's quoted 3 times, and that is verse 4, where God reveals to Habakkuk that through all of this destruction, through all of this judgment, through all of this chaos, that the just are going to live by faith. So too it is with us. If we look around and we see wickedness and chaos and things going wrong, we can rest assured that in time God is going to bring every evil act to judgment. No sin is going to escape his eye. He is going to reward everyone according to the things that they have done. But as for Habakkuk and his faithful contemporaries thousands of years ago, it is still true for us that the only way to escape judgment is through faith, is by relying on God, by placing our hope in him, by looking to him to rescue us from all the troubles that surround us. And if we are willing to do that, then we will not be disappointed. The third lesson from this book is that God is mighty and he will accomplish his purpose. Let's pick up our reading with verse 16 of Habakkuk 2. What use is a carved idol after its craftsman carves it? It is only a cast image, a teacher of lies. For the one who crafts its shape trusts in it and makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, wake up, or to mute stone, come alive. Can it teach? Look, it may be plated with gold and silver, yet there is no breath in it at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let the whole earth be silent in his presence. A prayer of the prophet Habakkuk, according to Shigionoth. Lord, I have heard the report about you. Lord, I stand in awe of your deeds. Revive your work in these years. Make it known in these years. In your wrath, remember mercy. God comes from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His brilliance is like light. Rays are flashing from his hand. This is where his power is hidden. Plague goes before him, and pestilence follows in his steps. He stands and shakes the earth. He looks and startles the nations. The age-old mountains break apart. The ancient hills sink down. His pathways are ancient. I see the tents of Cushan in distress. The tent curtains of the land of Midian tremble. Are you angry at the rivers, Lord? Is your wrath against the rivers? Or is your rage against the sea when you ride on your horses, your victorious chariot? You took the sheath from your bow. The arrows are ready to be used with an oath. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains see you and shudder. A downpour of water sweeps by. The deep roars with its voice and lifts its waves high. Sun and moon stand still in their lofty residence at the flash of your flying arrows, at the brightness of your shining spear. You march across the earth with indignation. You trample down the nations in wrath. You come out to save your people, to save your anointed. You crush the leader of the house of the wicked and strip him from foot to neck. You pierce his head with his own spears. His warriors storm out to scatter us, gloating as if ready to secretly devour the weak. You tread the sea with your horses, stirring up the vast water. In this section of Habakkuk, we see a contrast between the last part of chapter 2 and the first 3/4 of chapter 3. In chapter 2, Habakkuk, here, God is talking about the idols that are served by the Chaldeans and the other nations around. And he wants us to see how pathetic, how futile those idols are. They look impressive, but with their impressive look, they're really just teaching lies, because those idols are completely impotent. There is nothing that they can do. On the other hand, God, as depicted in chapter 3, is powerful. Indeed, he is omnipotent. He uses all the tools at his disposal to accomplish his will, and there is no force on earth that can stand against him. As was true for them, it also is true for us. In the United States of today, we don't see people bowing down to statues too much. But it is still true that we live in an idolatrous age. The Bible calls out love of money as idolatry, and indeed we are surrounded by the greedy. Others of our time, they make the government into their idol. They make politics into their idol. They even make science into their idol, and they look to these things to save and to protect them. Brethren, that's foolish, because the idols of today are no more able to protect than the statues of Baal and Molech of thousands of years ago. Certainly, I support the efforts that are now going on to discover a COVID vaccine. I hope that those efforts are speedy and that they quickly achieve their end. But even as we are praying with this hope in mind, we must remember that there never is going to be a vaccine against death. No matter how powerful the government becomes, no matter how wise its leaders are, they will never be able to rescue humanity from its sinful self. All of those hopes are vain. And just as he was powerful and active and alive thousands of years ago, so God remains powerful and active and alive today. He will work out his will in every particular. Just as he guided the course of history then, he continues to guide the course of history today. And even the people who think that they are rebelling against him, at the end, they will discover that they were doing his will all along. That is who God is. That is how powerful he is. And because that is so, even though there are all of these other vain hopes around us that are calling out to us, if we call out to the Lord, then we will not be disappointed. The final point of the book, though, I believe, simply this: trust in God no matter what. I heard, and I trembled within. My lips quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the day of distress to come against the people invading us. Though the fig tree does not bud and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen and there are no herds in the stalls, yet I will celebrate in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord, my Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer and enables me to walk on mountain heights. In this passage, we see what Habakkuk has learned from everything that God has said. The first thing that he learns, though, is, interestingly, that he ought to be afraid of the future, because he recognizes that the judgment that God has pronounced against his people is swift and certain. The Chaldeans are going to come in. They are going to invade. They are going to wreak fearful destruction on everything that Habakkuk knows. But that's not the conclusion of the book. The conclusion of the book begins in verse 17, where Habakkuk imagines things getting as bad as they can possibly get. He imagines a future in which every possible source of food in ancient Palestine is gone. There's no more figs, there's no grapes, there's no olives, there's no herds, there's no flocks. It's all gone. It's all been taken away. But Habakkuk's confidence in God is such that he says, even if that is true, I am still going to rejoice in God. I am still going to celebrate his salvation. Because he recognizes that regardless of what the physical, external world may look like, God is still able to rescue his people, and indeed, God still will rescue his people. This is a message of great hope for Habakkuk, and it ought to be a message of great hope for us today. Habakkuk knew what the future was going to look like. I don't know what the future is going to look like. It might be that all that we're going through now is just a blip on the radar screen, and we're headed into another era of prosperity and peace. Of course, it also may be that that's not what the future holds. It may be that things in the future are worse than I can imagine. And as I said, I'm a warrior, so I'm pretty good at imagining bad things. Habakkuk's point, though, is that simply doesn't matter. Because regardless of what the future looks like, we know that the future will have God in it. And if the future has God in it, then for God's people that is enough, and that will always be enough. Because we know that just as he rescued his people then, just as he brought them out of exile with an outstretched arm and a mighty hand, so his salvation continues to work in every one of our lives. What he has promised us, he will not fail in. And his will for us is to bring us home to him, to live with him forever. And with that promise, we can confront the future no matter what it holds. We can confront the future with comfort and with hope, so long as we continue to cling to him. All of this shows us, I think, just how important it always is to belong to God's people. Because people out in the world right now, people who don't have that connection with God, they look at the future and they're afraid, and they're right to be afraid. Because in the end, everything else that they might rely on is going to fail them. All of those idols are going to crumble and be destroyed. Not so for the faithful child of God. Our future is certain too. But our future is one of hope and one of eternal life. So if you are here this morning and you recognize that you have not put your trust in God, I think that today would be a great day to start. It may be that you're not a Christian. You've never been baptized into Christ. You have never called upon the name of the Savior. And if that's the case, then we would be delighted to baptize you this morning. Or it could be that you've done that, but you recognize that you've gone astray. You recognize that you haven't been living that faithful life according to which Habakkuk says we will live. And if that's where you are and you feel the need for the prayers of the congregation to get you back on track, then we'd be happy to pray with you to help you out. But whatever your position, recognize that all those other hopes that the world offers, those are just an illusion. But those who hope in God will not be disappointed. Come to Him now.